Hello, Coachy. My name is Rene Ibada. I'm a pastor in El Paso, Texas. 37 years ago, which is amazing to even say that. I was just out of high school. I was raised going to church. My mom was a Christian and did her best to raise us right. I grew up going to church. By the world's standards, I would say that wasn't what the world would say a bad kid, but inside my heart, there were things that I thought and did, and they weren't right. And so as I got into my high school years, I started doing things that I knew weren't right, and could only think sometimes of how to get right with God. I knew there was a God. I knew that was always a reality. And so my senior year in high school, what happened was a friend of mine who had already graduated had gotten saved, and I started hearing stories about how he had changed, and he was kind of like the troublemaker of the school. He was involved in drugs and involved in all kinds of insanity. And so I started hearing stories of how he had changed. And then one day I ran into him, and he was telling me about Jesus Christ and how God had miraculously changed his life. And at that point, I was in the process of going to a school out of town. I had already graduated from high school. I was getting ready to go to a college. And so this was all the timing of God, because he was telling me how Jesus Christ had changed his life. And that day I remember being just amazed at the difference in his life. And so I knew that he had something that I did not have. And so I went to this school out of town, and things didn't work out the way I thought. And so I came back at the end of the year, in between semesters, and I looked up this same friend that had witnessed to me, and he invited me out to church. He invited me out to the door, the church where I eventually got saved. And what's interesting to me is that I went to the church a whole month thinking that I was saved and that I was right with God. But in reality, I was not. And one night, my pastor preached a sermon, and I was so overwhelmed with conviction. I realized that I had gone through a lot of religious actions and processes, but I had never truly repented of my sin and gave my life to Jesus Christ. And that night, on a Wednesday night, I answered the altar call. And I know that night God changed my life. As we drove home from church that night, my mom and my two sisters, we were together. We were driving home, and I told my mom, I said, "Mom, tonight I got saved. I know that I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ." And right at that point, not on the outside, but on the inside, I knew that I had new desires. I knew that something real had happened in my life. A day or two later, I have an older brother. He told me, "Hey, let's go to the nightclubs." We had done this so many times, and I told him, "I don't want to do that. I'm not. That's something different. I don't want to do that anymore." And he told me I was crazy, and I told my dad that I'd given my life to Jesus. And he told me, he said, "This is just another one of the fads. This is another phase in your life. It'll pass." But it didn't. It didn't. I know that my life was changed. And so I was 19 years old and continued to serve God. And eventually I met my wife, and we dated, and we did things right. Got married about a year and a half later, and now we've been married. This past August, we celebrated 35 years of marriage. And believe me, I'm not perfect. I've stumbled along the way. I've made mistakes, but God is a good God. And so to the brothers and sisters that are serving God there in the church in Coachy, I want to encourage you, whether you're a teenager, a 20-something, 30-something, whatever. I'm 56 years old, and I can tell you that I have no regrets giving my life to Jesus Christ. It's an honor. It's a privilege to be saved, to now be in the ministry and to preach God's glorious gospel. It's a blessing upon blessing to live for God. And maybe one day I'll have the honor to go to your beautiful city and nation and to preach there for you. It would be a blessing beyond measure. But regardless, I just want to encourage you during this time of the quarantine and the coronavirus. We know that God's on the throne and He has a plan. And the Bible says that all things work together for the good, for those that are called according to His purposes. And that's you and I. Whether you're ever a minister or not, that's not the issue. That we are born again and we're saved. We have God's purposes upon our lives. I want to encourage you. And if you're listening to this and you've never given your life to Jesus Christ, I want to encourage you to do that. It's a simple prayer. You're one step away from repenting and giving your life to Jesus Christ.